Yeah, the roads there were from the Stone Arch Bridge all the way down to Dollymount. But where I'm talking about is where I lived, which was called Brookside Cottage, and it was up a small lane in its own small little holding of land. And we lived right beside the police station there, and we were perfectly placed for the sloblands across the road for walks. And believe it or not, we used to pick mushrooms up at 6 o'clock in the morning, my nan and I there. And to get back then to my area of the cottage, as we called Brookside, we had a lot of animals there. We had pigs, we had horses, two donkeys, and we had what was called a jinnet. Well, I don't know if you'd know what a jinnet is, but it's part donkey and part ass. So we lived our life there in relative comfort. We were never wanted for anything at the time. And it was a great childhood because all the animals I had, I was very happy to live my life with them. And the pigs were great. I had great fun cleaning them out, believe it or not, and getting a few bob every weekend of maybe a shilling or something. In old money, that's probably about 2 pence. So then I had a job before I went to school every morning, and that was making sure that the horses were yoked up before they started their day's chores. And then we would have, my nana and I would then collect the eggs from the hen houses, and they were sold to the local shops in the area. And it was an extra few bob, which was great for everybody. And we enjoyed talking to all the customers and them calling to us. And another thing we sold, believe it or not, was manure. And manure was very, very sought after for the people who had little gardens and big gardens in all the roads, Hollybrook Road, Hollybrook Grove, St. Lawrence's Road, Vernon Avenue. And we supplied it to all of those people. And then we had leased a field just up the road from us where we used to put the horses out to graze when our area wasn't too good with the grazing. So it was just a small, again, little holding, but it was only leased out to us, and that was leased to us by people who were called the Kellys. Then just down the road from my house, we had the shops. The first of them was O'Neill's shop. That was a little fish and a small grocery shop. Then we had the chemist shop, Hennessy's, and then we had Bennett's, which was a sweet shop, and next to that we had Key's shop, which was the newspapers and cigarettes. I used to go down there and buy 5 Woodbines with a box of matches for my dad. And then next to that, we had the Merville Dairy at the time, but that eventually ended up being a fish and chipper called Damasio's. And they were there for a long time. And then across the road, we had another shop called Giddings, and they were a general grocers. They had everything you wanted in there. And next to that was another shop called Walmsley's, and they were a haberdashery store. And then further from that, then we just had there was 2 chemist shops further down. And one was Hennessy's, I mentioned that, and the other one was Foley's. So they were right beside the Protestant church on the left-hand side, just beside St. Lawrence's Road. Then from that, across the road from St. Lawrence's Road was the Yacht, which was a pub. It was the local pub. My dad always had his few pints there. And then after that, you had Styles Road, and Styles Road was a really old. It was one of the oldest roads in Clontarf, but it was really a very sought after area, very nice. So then we went from that then back to my house in Clontarf. It was a 3-bedroom, a small kitchen and a small lounge, if you like to call it a lounge. In those days, they were called a parlour. And yes, we had great times there. In the family was my dad, my mum, my sister, myself, and my nana. My sister was the oldest in the family of the children. And my nana, she sort of looked after. She was the boss of everybody. More or less everything that she asked for went. And she was a great woman. They used to call her the Lady of Clontarf. That was her name. She always dressed very elegantly, and a lovely woman. And she had her own tragedy in life, but we won't go into that at the moment. And from there on, then we went into two mainstay dealers who came to us to buy pigs from, sometimes the odd pony. I had a little Shetland pony, and he was my pride and joy. Remember, one of the men wanted to buy it, and I was crying my eyes out, wouldn't let them. And my dad said, no, we'll keep him. So I was so happy about that. And the pigs, they were great. The horses, they did a lot of work, like I say, delivering goods to the people around the area and clearing out sheds and gardens that people wanted dumped, their rubbish dumped. So my Uncle Ned, he did all that. And then we went from that to, I suppose, the way life changed around was that when we had probably the worst time of our lives, but again, it's a story for another time because it hasn't really got a bearing on this particular story. And this is more or less about Clontarf. But we, as I say, we had horses, and we had a pony and trap. We used to yoke up the ponies, and we would travel out to Baldoyle Racecourse when the races were on. My mum and dad, my sister and me, and my nana. My nana loved a little bet on the horses, and my dad loved a bet as well. But we used to go, and it was great because my dad knew and my nana knew some of the people that had the horses there, and we used to go in and into the stables and talk to the jockeys and that, and they were great. Okay. Now, the Sloblands, when I was growing up, was very important to me, simply because it was a great area to play in. I used to play football and hurling there, and you always had to watch that the ball didn't go into the sea, which it did an awful lot of the times, and sometimes we never got the ball back. But the Sloblands also had what was called a culvert, which came down from where I lived, the river. As I said, our house was called Brookside, and it was the brook that came down. It used to flow down into this big, what they had was like a little tunnel. And we used to stand, it was a concrete tunnel, and we used to stand on it in the summer and dive off it into the water. And that's where I learned how to swim effectively, even though my uncle was a swimmer and also an instructor of swimming down at Clontarf Bats. But he never showed me one stroke. So I learned all that myself. Not great, but I learned it. And but it was great. The fun we had on that was fantastic. And it's where I met my first friend, a lad called Paul Churchyard. And he had just moved into Hollybrook Grove, where they had just built new houses in the area. And he was the first house on the road up into it. And I befriended him and his family, his sisters, two sisters, and his other brother, Gerard. I have no idea where they are now. I have never had any contact with them. But the times we had was really fantastic times. And at times we used to sneak into the police yard because in the police yard they had a bowling alley. And we used to practice bowling in the police yard. And a very odd time, we'd sneak in. If the window was open, we'd sneak in and play billiards on the billiard table. And many's a clout I got at the back of the head from the guards. But it didn't deter us. We still went in. But my dad was in great friends with the police lads and my mum. My mum used to cook meals for them when they came in from their for their lunches and after beat, and she would have meals cooked for them again. She got a few quid for that, I don't know what, but it wasn't a lot, I'm sure. But they were terrific people that we grew up with, I suppose. My nana, everybody loved my nana. She was such a great person. And I missed her terribly when she died. And in fairness, she lived to 92, which was great age. But it was still very sad to see her go. But back then onto the Slablands. The Slablands was really a place where my great granduncle worked on when they were building the stone wall that came from Lawrence's Road all the way down to Dollymount. And he used to haul with many others the sand and the bags of cement and everything for that. And it came up on a barge, which is still visible in the sea just across the road from my house. And so there we have it in relation to the Slablands. As I say, it was great. But they did ruin it when they started to build the road from Clontarf across to East Wall to form the East Link bridge or East Link passage. And what happened there was they put up these terrible hoardings, and they ruined the whole look of the place because the water used to go right up to the bridge at the stone arches, and that just went. They cleared all that away and filled it all in. And so basically that's, yeah. As I mentioned earlier, a tragedy that befell the household. It was when my dad met with a very serious accident. He nearly died from it, and he was in hospital for nearly 2 years. And it was from an accident with a car that came speeding along the main road as he was crossing over to take two of our horses from the Slablands up to our holding. Ribs were broken, he had a fracture in his skull, and he had clots on lungs and so on, which they had to try and get. So all in all, he was on crutches for about 12, 14 months when he got out of hospital. And of course, he couldn't work. There was no way he could do any work. So I had to come out of school at the age of 13, and I had to more or less take over the charge with my nana and my mum. And we worked very hard at that. My mum was brilliant. She would come with me on some of the deliveries that I did with the manure and then with the clearing out of places. And they had really a different type of lifestyle since the accident. We were totally demoralised, I suppose would be the word, and financially demoralised. But the great thing was all our neighbours were excellent. We had, as I said earlier, we had wonderful neighbours, And the people, Kelly, who I mentioned earlier about that we leased the farm from, or the holding from, they would always come and see if we had everything that we wanted. And the best part was when the police, every Christmas, well, for the 2 Christmases, they would get up a beautiful hamper of a turkey, a ham, biscuits, tea, and butter and bread, and we would get it every Christmas from them. And also, I'm sure there was a few bob can given in as well, but I'm not sure about that, but I'm sure there was. And so that helped us through that. And my mum, she worked very, very hard. As I said earlier, she used to work in the police station and doing the meals for the lads every day. And then she would come and work with me and my sister. She went into school because somebody had to get educated properly, and my sister, she did. And so what happened after that was when I left school then, I more or less took over the running of everything. And I was doing the dealing and the wheeling, selling pigs, buying pigs. There was 2 men. One was a man called Barnwell, Paul Barnwell, and the other man was a man called Monks, Billy Monks, who actually played for the Dublin team in the 50s. But they used to do a lot of dealings with us and always treated us very fair. And I always remember when Billy Monks came, he would give me a shilling just for myself. And a shilling, I could get a cream slice and a few bars. And that was the way I sort of enjoyed the little benefits that I got. But at the end of the day, the tragedy, it carried right through our whole family, all our life then from that point on. And my dad did get a small job, which was very simple. He eventually was gone onto a walking stick. And the small job he was in a company called Richardson's. And they used to make disinfectant and polish. And he used to just sit around and count the stuff. I think they just gave him a job just to keep him going. And but at the time, every penny was very, very useful to us. But at the end of it all, I could never look back and say that I regret. I just regret the accident that we had. But living where I was living, I found was a great upbringing. It was absolutely, particularly with all the animals and the little river that ran by our house. I had great games and that on my own when Paul wasn't around. I used to go up the river, sometimes rob the odd orchard up the road, up the top of the river, and then I would play cowboys and Indians. I would play war. Many of the time I was half dead, but I came back, ended up being the hero. And only when my mum would be calling me, I would come back. But there were great times. And it was just one of those idyllic times for me because my imagination used to run wild with me, and cowboys and Indians loved them, as most young lads at that age did. So I think that the general aspect of everything was the accident. That was the major throwback in our lives. But my dad then eventually decided, right, everything was too much for me and that, and he wanted me to have a better life than what we were doing there. And it all came to a head when swine fever attacked our pigs, and they were all destroyed, every one of them, by the government. And we only got a small compensation for that, I think only fraction of what they were worth. So my dad decided, right, he'll try and let out the yard and that, which he did, and the company Richardson's took over the whole area. And eventually, actually, the name was Richardson's, but the man who actually did all the business was an Italian man called Alberici. And he looked after my dad with the job. And eventually, they decided to buy the whole lot. So in modern terms, what I call now, and I've written a little story about my dad, that I call it was sold for £1.06 in modern terms, because the holding itself, where it was worth a small fortune. But when you need money and your back is to the wall, you sort of go with your instincts, and that's what he did. No regrets. We bought a house then up on Brookwood Road up in Coolock, and that's where I got married from there. And I lived there for a few years. My dad died there, my mum died there, so... One of the other great things about Clontarf was it was a very busy thoroughfare for people taking walks, and also it was the main road out to Baldoyle, where, as I said earlier, we used to go out, and there was a lot of pony and traps before the horses, actually, before the cars came in their big numbers. But the Sloblands was a place where everything really happened. There was seats all along, you could walk along, have a rest, sit down, look out across at the sea. And on the other side, at what was called the East Wall, there was a lot of activity going on. Goulding's factory was across the way, and there was a lot of Esso reservoir tanks that they had out there along the way, and the odd time an odd ship would come up close by, and even though it couldn't come into the seafront, but it was very visible for us, and we used to see the B&I boat going out that was called the mail boat, and we used to watch that going. And then when we would go down to we say Dollymount to go swimming and that, we always walked because we didn't have any other transport, and the times we would go was mostly Saturday and Sunday, and you would invariably see the Artane boys lads walking from the Artane school up in Coolock all the way down to Dollymount and back again. And my nana used to say to me, if you're not a good boy, you're going to end up like those lads. And that scared us a bit. But at the end of it all, it was sad to see them. But they were all, every Sunday, they'd be walking out. And unless, of course, it was raining, they didn't go. But it was just a wonderful place. And as I said earlier, my nana and I, at 6 o'clock in the morning, we would pick mushrooms that just sprung up. You'd be walking along and we'd have a big brown bag with us, and we'd have about 20, 30 mushrooms in minutes, and they'd be on the pan that day for the breakfast.